Good evening. My name is Enrica Jang, Executive Director of Poe Baltimore and the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. On this day, February 14, 1846, Virginia Eliza Clem Poe, devoted wife of Edgar Allan Poe, pens an acrostic Valentine for her husband. This is the only piece of writing in Virginia's own words that survives. For a young woman who played such a crucial role in the writer's life, it's tragic to note that not much more exists of the woman herself, as within a year of writing the piece, she would die of tuberculosis. Tonight features a reading of Virginia's Valentine for Edgar, read by actress and historian Debbie Phillips, sharing her research about Virginia's perspective and the circumstances of her marriage to Edgar, as Debbie prepares for a living history presentation at the Bicentennial celebration later this year. Then, join me for a graveside chat with Dean Knight from the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia, and listen to excerpts from Edgar Allan Poe's epistolary proposal of marriage to Virginia in 1835. Very special thanks to the staff of the Poe Museum in Richmond for their contributions to the program this year. Please enjoy our Valentine's Day preview of the Virginia Poe Bicentennial, a most poetical year of programming to commemorate the 200th birthday of Virginia Eliza Clem Poe. And if you enjoy this series and would like to participate in our next session, stay to the end to learn how to register.
Hello, my name is Debbie Phillips. I am here in the wonderful research library of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. Freelance, doing living history interpretation. I do a number of different women throughout history, some not related to Poe, but some related to Poe, including his mother, Eliza, and his fiancée, Elmira. I'm adding to my repertoire for her 200th birthday, Virginia Clem Poe, Edgar's lovely bride, his child bride, and his muse in many, many ways. When one is doing living history interpretation and doing the research that goes into this, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that we are speaking about topics that are very uncomfortable for people of the 21st century. Honestly, the topics that come up when one is discussing Virginia and Edgar's relationship were difficult even for those of the 19th century. This was a strange relationship in some ways. Her age is a major source of concern. She was 13 years old. While women in the South did tend to get married a bit younger than their counterparts in northern cities, the average age by the 1830s was hovering around 17, up to about 20 or 21. 13 was an outlier by their standards. And given the news developments in our own world and in our country over the past many years, it's important that we acknowledge that this is a disturbing facet of Edgar's life, but my purpose is to try to give a little bit of voice to Virginia in this. So when Edgar left West Point in 1831, he was 22 years old, and he moved in with his Aunt Maria and his grandmother in Baltimore. Living with them was his older brother William and Maria's two children, Henry and Virginia. Virginia was 8. She would turn 9 that summer. Edgar, at this point, has no family. His mother, who loved him, is dead before he's 3. His foster mother, who loved him, Frances Allen, has been dead for a couple of years now, and John Allen, his foster father, has remarried a much younger woman, and he has no interest in having Edgar in his life anymore. His young bride certainly doesn't want Edgar around. So Edgar does not have a family. When he moves in with his Aunt Maria, he starts calling her Muddy, which is a term of endearment, possibly kind of a nickname for mother, almost like the German word Mutti, even though they weren't a German family. She had, for a short time there, it's like she had 3 sons. William had been living with the family for some years, his older brother, and of course she had her own son, Henry. Well, William dies that summer that Edgar moves in, right before Virginia turns 9. And we don't know what happens to Henry. Presumably he passes away as well because he disappears from the record. Soon Edgar is the only man of the household, and that seems to be the case for a few years until 1835, when circumstances were set up for him to leave Baltimore and move to Richmond. His grandmother, Elizabeth Cairns Poe, who had been supporting the family with a pension from her and her husband's service in the Revolutionary War, passed away in July of 1835. Edgar returned to Richmond to begin working for the Southern Literary Messenger the following month. When he left Baltimore, it almost seems as though he had some kind of an understanding with Virginia, if not with her mother. By this time, Virginia is 13 years old. When he arrives in Richmond, he's not here for very long before he receives a letter from Maria Muddy asking him what she should do because his cousin Nelson, who happens to be her stepson-in-law and Virginia's brother-in-law, has offered to take in Virginia and take care of her, to continue her education, to give her certain accomplishments so that she can enter into society. Edgar's response to Muddy is desperate. This is a man who is once again seeing that he is going to be left alone. Muddy's predicament, however, is also to be understood here. When her husband passed away in 1826, no one in his family offered her any assistance because they did not support the marriage. Her own family was not in very much of a position to help her either, which is probably one of the reasons why she and her mother, Elizabeth Poe, had been living together for some years on her pension and whatever washing Maria could take in. So finally, she's in a position where a wealthier member of the family, Nelson, is ready to come in and take over the financial obligations to care for her and for Virginia, which is why she's in a quandary. She loves Edgar. He's her son in many ways. But Nelson is offering stability, which, to be fair, Edgar has not been able to provide up until this point. So his letter from Richmond is filled with desperate pleas to realize that he's in a position now where he can support the family. But there's very thinly veiled threats of suicide and interspersed throughout, and he's obviously in quite a state. And this is because this is a man who is terrified to the depths of his being of being alone, of being left alone. He returns to Baltimore. He secures a marriage license in September of 1835. Virginia's been 13 for only a few short weeks. Scholars argue and debate over whether or not they actually were married in Baltimore, but he returns to Richmond that fall with Virginia and Muddy. We don't have a lot of letters or anything from her where she tells us how she feels about this. We don't know if she had a crush on some boy who lived down the road, but we do know that her mother was putting quite a lot of pressure on her as well to accept Edgar as her husband, because if Edgar marries Virginia, he will become the legal guardian for their family. They will be his responsibility, and no one, not Nelson or any other male relative, could ever come in with power of attorney that they could exercise over female relations and take them away from him. In fact, not long after they returned to Richmond, Edgar and Muddy both referred to them being under Edgar's protection. Scholars argue and debate over what the nature of their relationship was, whether there was a romantic relationship, whether they were properly married as husband and wife, or if they lived as brother and sister. We will never know. That's something that we can speculate till the world's end. We're never going to know that. But we do know that she was his muse, his ideal in a lot of ways. I believe that he placed her on a pedestal above other women in a lot of ways. Everyone who visited their home saw their mutual devotion to each other. Early scholars say that she was mentally deficient, that he was disappointed in her lack of intelligence, but we know that he paid to have her tutored. He paid for tutors at great expense to himself. He was teaching her algebra himself for a while. We know that she helped him with his correspondence and with his papers. She played the harp and sang and played piano for him. I think this was an intelligent woman. We do have one poem that she left to him. She gave this to him as a gift for him on Valentine's Day in 1846. It was less than a year before she would die from tuberculosis. She'd been suffering from tuberculosis for several years by this time. Edgar said she would burst a blood vessel when she was singing. She's coughing up blood. And in those intervening years between the first severe signs of the illness and her death, there are theories and rumors and suppositions and some evidence that Edgar was involved with some other women. So it seems that wounded Virginia quite deeply. If she and Edgar did not have a romantic relationship, she still loved him very deeply by this point. Keep in mind, she didn't stay 13. They were married for 11 years. So by her early 20s, and she hears that he's possibly philandering with other women, it hurts her in a lot of ways. On her deathbed, she would actually accuse one of these women, Elizabeth Elliot, of being her murderer. But she did write this poem for him, and it's an acrostic poem. The first letter of each verse spells out his name. And this is a woman of intelligence and of great passion. It's called Valentine. Ever with thee I wish to roam, dearest, my love is thine. Give me a cottage for my home and a rich old cypress vine, removed from the world with its sin and care and the tattling of many tongues. Love alone shall guide us when we are there. Love shall heal my weakened lungs. And oh, the tranquil hours we'll spend, never wishing that others may see. Perfect ease we'll enjoy, without thinking to lend ourselves to the world and its glee. Ever peaceful and blissful will be. And so he moved her to the cottage at Fordham, which today is in the Bronx, and it is there that she passed away on the 30th of January, 1847, at the age of 24.
Hello, my name is Dean Knight, and I am the programs coordinator here at the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. I don't remember when I didn't know about Poe. I read him when I was a kid, when I was 10 years old, probably earlier than that. And I actually, my mother brought me here to the Poe Museum when I was about 10 years old, because I was already reading him, or I already knew something about him. And my mother had probably already figured out that, you know, I was kind of a weird kid and liked stuff like Poe. So she brought me here because I grew up here in Richmond. So it wasn't a long trip. But yeah, I literally don't remember a time when I was not aware of Poe.
We do have to be, we're the weird kids, right? There's something about Poe that kind of sticks with you if you're a weird kid. And I think that story is pretty common.
No.
High school, these stories keep you awake in English class in high school, but they stay with you for some reason.
They do. Yeah. There are reasons why we're still reading Poe, you know, 150 and more years after these stories. They're great stories, and they're about us. You know, they're about human beings. and the things and our world.
Share with us, I know the museum is celebrating a very special anniversary this year, so tell us about the Poe Museum in Richmond, and tell us about what's important about this year.
The Poe Museum is almost exactly 100 years old. The Poe Museum opened in April of 1922. And of course, I'm speaking to you now in February of 2022. So we are just a couple months away from our 100th anniversary. In fact, I just got out of a meeting when we were talking about all the things that we're doing to celebrate and commemorate 100 years of interpreting Poe here in his hometown, here in his home neighborhood. You know, we say that a lot. You know, people, as you know, Enrica, people associate Poe with Baltimore more than with Richmond. But you know, we tell people this is where he's from. And also with that, the Poe Museum, and sometimes I tell people this to distinguish us from you and from the house in Philadelphia and the house in New York, is that, you know, we call ourselves the Poe Museum for a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't have a house that he lived in, but we do have the largest collection of things related to Poe anywhere in the world on public display, and we're here in his hometown. So I think that that makes us special. This is where he's from. We have the stuff, as I think you said, even, you know, we've got the collection, and we're in his hometown, we're in his home neighborhood, and this is where he's from.
Well, in the great Poe fight, just know I'm going to edit out more of the persuasive bits of your argument, but without argument, no, the Poe collection at the Poe Museum in Richmond is absolutely wonderful, cannot miss. So we'll definitely, we'll take that. But we share with us maybe some of the history that you talk about in Richmond, about Virginia, about Poe's wife. Anything that we should look for, or anything that would be of interest when it comes to Virginia?
Sure. So one thing I talk about frequently is when Poe did move back here as an adult in 1835. It was after living in Baltimore for 4 years. As you know, of course, he lived in two different houses, one house in what is now Little Italy, I believe, and then the house that you're in charge of in what was then, you know, kind of the western outskirts or suburbs of the city. And for all of those 4 years, he was living with family, with biological Poe family. And, you know, I've always thought that's a major reason why he moved to Baltimore in the first place, because he didn't really want to come back here because of his problems with John Allan. He was looking for family, and so he looked to his biological family. And there's, you know, Baltimore was unquestionably by far the single best place for Edgar Poe to look for biological family, because they're all there. So he moves into this house with a whole bunch of his family members, including his own brother and his aunt and her daughter, and a couple other people as well. And so for these next 4 years, he's surrounded by family, fewer as time goes on, but that core trio of Poe and Maria Clem and Virginia, it gets established, I think, pretty early on in the Baltimore years, 1831 to 35. So any context of thinking about Poe's marriage and the circumstances around that should keep that in mind. You know, he'd gone to Baltimore in search of family. Of course, there's also a bigger city and there's more publishing opportunities, et cetera, as we've already talked about. But he's looking for family, and he creates family in Baltimore. And, you know, he establishes this family. And then when he moves back down here to Richmond, he moves alone at first, but then he learns that another Poe family member, Nelson Poe, has offered to take in at least Virginia, if not Virginia and Maria Clem as well. And this deeply disturbs Poe. He doesn't want to lose this family that he's created. And so that's when he writes this letter that we're taking a look at.
August 29th. My dearest Auntie, I am blinded with tears while writing this letter. I have no wish to live another hour. Amid sorrow and the deepest anxiety, your letter reached, and you well know how little I am able to bear up under the pressure of grief. My bitterest enemy would pity me could he now read my heart. My only hold on life is cruelly torn away. I have no desire to live, and will not. But let my duty be done. I love Virginia passionately, devotedly. I cannot express in words the fervent devotion I feel towards my dear little cousin, my own darling. But what can I say? Oh, think for me, for I am incapable of thinking. All of my thoughts are occupied with the supposition that both you and she will prefer to go with N. Poe. I do sincerely believe that your comforts will, for the present, be secured. I cannot speak as regards your peace, your happiness. You have both tender hearts, and you will always have the reflection that my agony is more than I can bear, that you have driven me to the grave, for love like mine can never be gotten over. It is useless to disguise the truth that when Virginia goes with N.P. that I shall never behold her again. That is absolutely sure. Pity me, my dear auntie, pity me. I have no one now to fly to. I am among strangers, and my wretchedness is more than I can bear. It is useless to expect advice from me. What can I say? Can I, in honor and in truth, say, Virginia, do not go. Do not go where you can be comfortable and perhaps happy. And on the other hand, can I calmly resign my life itself? If she had truly loved me, would she not have rejected the offer with scorn? Oh, God, have mercy on me. If she goes with N.P., what are you to do, my own auntie? I had procured a sweet little house in a retired situation on Church Hill, newly done up and with a large garden and every convenience, at only $5 a month. I have been dreaming every day and night since of the rapture I should feel in having my only friends, all I love on earth, with me there, and the pride I would take in making you both comfortable and in calling her my wife. But the dream is over. Oh, God, have mercy on me. What have I to live for? Among strangers with not one soul to love me.
You've explained that there's a crossroads and a sort of a place where Virginia's life might have changed significantly at this moment in time, had the people most important in her life not kind of effectively made this decision for her. I think there's a little question about perhaps Virginia's choice in the matter. In the text of Poe's letter, he talks about, please make this decision, please. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? But receiving a letter like that, being on the receiving end of a letter like that, what choices are being offered here?
Sure. And, that's a very good point to bring up, how much choice, how much agency did Virginia have herself? She was a child, at the time of their marriage, she was only 13. So then you think, the 4 years they were living together, she's 9, 10, 11, 12. So yeah, this is a child. And the letter is not to Virginia, it's to Maria Clem. Nelson Poe is offered to take them in, and Poe freaks out. And apparently, and this is something I don't think I'd fully understood before I spent some real time staring at this letter and reading it over and over again. It seems as though the idea of Poe marrying her had already been broached at some point.
That's an important clue. It seems like that conversation had at least come up. So.
Right. And in what context, we don't know. And we have very little from Virginia herself throughout her whole life. From what I know, she was not a writer the way Poe was, and I don't think there's much written from her. So it's letters like this that are so important in discussing Poe's biography, but also the biographies of those closest to him, like Maria Clem and Virginia Clem. This trio was broken only by death.
It is true. There's no place or nowhere that the couple goes that Maria, Virginia's mother, Poe's aunt, doesn't go to. So the three of them, very much a family, make a home together. And Maria survives everyone. She survives all of her children. She survives Poe and her dying wish to be buried next to her beloved darling Eddie. And he's very much on her mind when she passes.
Right. And when he dies, as you know, part of the trip that he's making is to go up to New York to get her. He's planning to marry a different woman, but I mean, from what we can tell, or from what I've read, there's no discussion about whether or not Mariah Clem is going to be part of this new family. She just is. He's going to go up to Fordham and get her and pick up some shirts or whatever, and then come back down to Richmond, and she's going to be part of his new family. So, and of course, the nickname that he has for Muddy, indicates that he thought of her basically as like his own mother,
Right.
pretty much.
The tone of your letter wounds me to the soul. Oh, Auntie, you loved me once. How can you be so cruel now? You speak of Virginia acquiring accomplishments and entering into society. You speak in so worldly a tone. Are you sure she would be more happy? Do you think anyone could love her more dearly than I?
We can't make the story less creepy. And that has to be a caveat, right? As Poe historians, we have to share that there's nothing that we can say to kind of make the situation less creepy. But we have to be honest about the context. But this is also a story over 200 years old, and our vocabulary for how we broach these topics, how we talk about these subjects, it gets a little bit more uncomfortable as people begin to understand the implications of such a young girl marrying and what's going on there, the rights of women at this time, the financial situation, and the abject poverty, imminent poverty when Mariah doesn't have anywhere to go, and then later on the poverty that the family suffers because of Poe struggling and the family struggling later. My personal question for you, do you feel that your emphasis as a historian changes as another generation kind of comes in, begins to talk about these subjects when you broach these topics? Do you tell the story differently as in the present day, more awareness? It becomes part of the zeitgeist, becomes part of the culture, and then a new generation of young men, young women learning this story. Do things change in how you tell the story?
Well, yes and no. I say that it is a mistake to take people out of their own historical context and judge them according to our lights today. I think that's a mistake, and so I don't do that. But it absolutely is important, if we're talking about history, writing about history, to continue to look at things from different perspectives. One reason that I'm very happy to be part of this series of programs is because I have not thought about Virginia all that much, and when I think about her, I think about her through the lens of Poe. I mean, that's the way it is, and so I'm excited to be looking at things from different perspectives. That certainly wouldn't have been thought of very much a few decades ago, and so I think it's absolutely vital to look at things and people and situations from different perspectives. When you read other biographers and other accounts, including Poe himself, you see how stories can be told in different ways. History, especially biography, is it's interpretation, and we absolutely use ourselves and our who we are now to look at things in a different way without committing the sin of presentism, without judging people by our standards today. That would not and does not go very well, and it's not productive.
As a performer, I mean, you have a career in acting and not just your work at the Poe House, the Poe Museum, but for a stage actor. So how did you approach the letter? You have a very almost hysterical text and just trying a straight reading of this, it's even hard not to. The voice goes up a little bit and the pace kind of changes, but you do a wonderful job in presenting the letter. But how did you approach the letter?
Thank you. And yeah, this is a challenging thing to do. To me, this was more challenging than reading Poe's poetry, because if I read one of Poe's poems, then it's my interpretation, it's my thing. I'm big on stanchions, so I got it all scanned out and everything. So of course you need to honor the rhythm and the verse, the meter, but ultimately it's Dean Knight reads the Raven. It's my own take on it. It's my own version. This is Edgar Allan Poe. So although I didn't try to sound like what Poe sounded like, in large part because we don't know what he sounded like. You know, the challenge was that this is an authentic letter written by him, and I need to somehow reflect what I think is going on in his head and why he's writing this. So yeah, it's definitely a more challenging assignment than to read one of his poems. And this particular letter it's just, I mean, I understand why biographies just reprint the entire thing, because it's so crucial. It's written at such a crucial point in Poe's personal life and professional life. And he's just, I mean, he's almost unhinged, maybe, or maybe not, because there might be some calculation in this letter.
She will have far, very far better opportunities of entering into society here than with NP. Everyone here receives me with open arms. Adieu, my dear auntie. I cannot advise you. Ask Virginia. Leave it to her. Let me have, under her own hand, a letter bidding me goodbye forever, and I may die. My heart will break, but I will say no more. EAP. Kiss her for me, 1,000,000 times. For Virginia. My love, my own sweetest sissy, my darling little wifey, think well before you break the heart of your cousin Eddie. I open this letter to enclose the $5. I have just received another letter from you announcing the receipt of mine. My heart bleeds for you. Dearest auntie, consider my happiness while you are thinking about your own. I am saving all I can. The only money I have yet spent is 50 cents for washing. I have $2.25 left. I will shortly send you more. Write immediately. I shall be all anxiety and dread until I hear from you. Try and convince my dear Virginia how devotedly I love her.
In your own words or your opinion, is it important to talk about Virginia? I mean, and when it certainly comes to Poe scholarship, as you said, we can only know her through really the lens of Edgar. And so she's a projection, but is it important to talk about her, and why?
It absolutely is important, but you know, the problem is, as we both already touched on, is that, you know, she didn't really leave much documentation of herself. So when it comes down to it, of necessity, we have to approach her through other people for the most part. But I think absolutely there's room to try that, and to try all the avenues that we can to look at the different people associated with Poe, especially the many women that Poe had some kind of relationship with over the years, and look at them and talk and think about how much agency they had in their relationship, you know, what the times were like, and you know, what was going on. And Virginia, you know, Poe was still married to Virginia when he was very famous in New York, and going to all those literary societies, salons, and meeting lots of other women. So that would also be a fruitful area of interest and study, to look into both Virginia, who was not a literary person, and the other women that Poe was talking to and interacting with, who were literary people and were drawn to him because of literature, but also it became personal, you know, like Fanny Osgood and Sarah Helen Whitman, who certainly seems to me to be a quite interesting person, and was a writer herself. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of validity in looking at these other people associated with Poe.
Can you share a little bit about Elmira Shelton, a little bit about who she was?
So Elmira Shelton was Elmira Royster Shelton was Poe's first and last fiancée. With under her maiden name, Elmira Royster, she and Poe got engaged when she was 15 and Poe was 17. So they met here in Richmond, and just about 20 blocks away from the museum. They lived near each other, and they would meet. And Poe went off to college, and he wrote letters home to her, and she did not respond. And when he gets back from college, you know, after his unsuccessful year at UVA, he finds out that her father had intercepted those letters and had steered her towards a different man. He picked out a different guy that he wanted her to marry. And the man that he picked, Alexander Shelton, was sort of everything that Poe wasn't. He was clearly destined to live a safe, comfortable, upper middle class existence as a businessman. He's going to take good care of his family. He wasn't going to be, drinking and writing poems. So she marries this guy, and the marriage, it seems to be perfectly happy. I think that she and her father were happy, but then he died. Alexander Shelton died, and of course Virginia dies, and so late in Poe's life, in 1848, they meet again. And then in 1849, they get engaged again. So the widow, Elmira Shelton, who lives, and her house is still here. It's right up here on Church Hill. And that's when Poe dies, he is engaged to this woman. So his plan was to move back here and marry her again, but he died before that could happen.
It is interesting that you mentioned that. We do talk the original Notebook, the parents kind of keeping the letters, keeping them apart, and then to reunite with effectively a high school sweetheart at the end of his life, after he's experienced, gone through this experience of watching his wife linger and then eventually pass. So what that relationship might have meant, not just financially, but to be reunited again. As you note, I'm thinking about this now, as you know, he'd already experienced a failed engagement before proposing to Virginia, where, as you said, her father, Elmira's father, found someone who could provide, was going to be all of the things that Poe was not. And so he'd already experienced the loss of a woman for these reasons, somebody who could provide for her, give her the life that he could not. And faced with the prospect of that again, maybe perhaps this contributing. So a little bit of that hysteria. One of the questions we will be exploring, Virginia is often considered to be the inspiration for Annabel Lee. In this conversation, though, we've talked about a few different women that Poe may have been involved with, and David Galen, president of the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore, is going to be sort of giving us a little bit of a debate as to some of the candidates. No fewer than, I think he said, 7 women could have been claimed to be the inspiration. So who was Annabel Lee to you? Who are you convinced? Are you convinced?
Well, first of all, I'm sure that David Galen knows more about that than I do. He definitely knows a great deal. What I tend to say when this topic comes up is that, well, first of all, as you know, Poe himself didn't comment on it because Annabel Lee was published after he died. And then I say, well, Annabel Lee was a fictional character. And I mean, I say that knowing full well that people will see that as something of a dodge. But I do get that out first, at least, because I believe it. Poe is a writer of fiction. And all fictional writers use some part or parts of themselves or people they knew in their fiction, but the kind of writing that Poe is writing is not as close to his life as I think it's sometimes made out to be. I mean, there are writers who write quite close to their own lives. Marcel Proust and Jean Genet are 2 of my favorite writers who do that. They write, they're writing kind of pretty directly about themselves. I don't know that Poe's doing that, though, in most or any of his fiction. So I guess if I had to answer it, I mean, if Annabel Lee is about any one woman more than another, I have to say it's Virginia, because Annabel Lee is about a beautiful young woman who he was very happy with, and they were living in a beautiful kingdom, and then she dies, young. So that certainly fits the story of Virginia much better than any of the other women that Poe knew or had any relationship with.
I'm a little persuaded about Elmira, considering his engagement to her at such she was a child and I was a child. That certainly was not the case when it came to his marriage to Virginia. So I'm a little bit more persuaded by perhaps the Elmira argument, but we'll see what comes out in the great, a little bit like with the sports brackets. We'll have these women go head to head.
Right.
I'm also a little bit, Poe does write The Raven right about the time in the midst of Virginia's illness. And when he talks, in his own analysis of the most poetical subject in the world, the death of a beautiful woman, he has a dying, beautiful woman at home. And so Lenore, the author, having experienced loss, facing imminent loss over and over and over again, I am a little bit more persuaded that Virginia inspires the Raven.
Hmm. I can certainly see that. As you say, she was, she suffered for years, and Poe was, that famous letter that he wrote, I became insane with long intervals of horrible sanity and the oscillation between hope and despair. That's when another great letter when Poe was pouring his heart out and very revealing, that it's clear as to what his state of mind was for years, dealing with Virginia's illness. And so, yeah, sure, I can absolutely agree that helped influence the Raven, and sort of like Poe predicting her death. It was there in front of him all the time. And of course, people were dying all around him because of tuberculosis. People were dying all around everyone because of all these awful diseases. So there you go.
Thank you for watching our special Valentine's Day presentation for the Virginia Poe Bicentennial, commemorating the 200th birthday of the beloved wife of Edgar Allan Poe. We look forward to a most poetical year of monthly virtual and in-person programs, including graveside chats, hidden history, discussion series, and exhibits. Subscribe to Poe Baltimore's channel on YouTube or like our page on Facebook so you can be notified about upcoming events and discussions. And if you would like to participate in one of the monthly programs, visit virginiapoebicentennial.eventbrite.com to register for a live interactive session. We begin in March with Muse, the life and death of Virginia Poe and all the ways she's still with us, plus a virtual tour of the Poe Cottage at Fordham in New York. In April, we celebrate National Poetry Month with Poetess, a reading of selected Poe poems and original works by poets in Baltimore and Richmond, plus 2 guest speakers to talk about Poe's feminine ideal and who is the real Annabel Lee. May is a month for all things mother. We'll share the hidden histories of the women in the Poe family, including a Revolutionary War patriot and how a mother's love changed literary history. June is wedding month, and our discussion centers on marriage. Our guests include historical fiction writer Lynn Cullen, author of the best-selling novel Mrs. Poe. We also welcome the return of Dean Knight from the Poe Museum, and Susan Elizabeth Sweeney will share the connection between Edgar Allan Poe and the Nabokov novel Lolita. In July, we'll explore mourning rites and traditional feminine in mid-19th century America with Lord Hayden Peters, jewelry scholar and historian curating artofmourning.com. Then delve deep into cemetery lore with the Dying to Tell Their Stories blog historians. All sessions are recorded live. And, save the date, the Virginia Poe Bicentennial, a 200th birthday commemoration and concert, will take place Saturday, August 13th at Westminster Hall and Burial Ground. Look for details and tickets next month.